Hello, and thank you for joining us during one of our initial sessions of All Energy Decarbonised webinar series. I am Peter Blore, the Events Director. We are delighted that so many of you have taken the time to join us here today on what would have been the original dates and the 20th anniversary of the All Energy Decarbonised exhibition and conference at the SEC in Glasgow. Now, unfortunately, we could not be together at the venue this week. However, we are tremendously excited to bring the renewable and low carbon energy community closer together with the launch of our new webinar series, which we are very pleased to announce will be running monthly, bringing our community closer together throughout the year and delivering high quality content to stimulate inspiration, new connections and innovation within the industry. Now, throughout the series, we encourage you to ask questions directly to our speakers who will be responding back to you. To actively engage in the live polls during our webinars as they provide our presenters with vital industry feedback. We would also like you to approach us if you're interested in speaking during future sessions and have an interest in sponsoring the webinar series or would like to obtain more information regarding attendance at our All Energy Decarbonised exhibition and conference later this year. After our webinars, we will be sending out a post-webinar survey and would highly appreciate your feedback. A special thank you must go to our sponsor, the Scottish Government, alongside our three chairs, Matt Smith, Nigel Holmes and Dr. Keith McLean, who have been instrumental in delivering our initial sessions in this series, alongside our brilliant speakers who have taken their valuable time to join us. Being our 20th anniversary, I would also like to provide a special mention and thank you to the All Energy co-founder Judith Patton, because without her starting the event all those years ago and continually sourcing excellent content and connections, we would not be here together today. Lastly, and during these unprecedented times, I would like to finish by wishing you all and your family good health and well-being. We very much look forward to meeting you all again soon, face-to-face in the near future. I will now pass you over to our chair speakers, so please enjoy the content and engage. Thank you once again for joining us.
Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome to the afternoon session for the All Energy Replacement. This is the offshore wind session. We of course would be, many of you in the audience would be walking the floor right now in Glasgow, the exhibition centre, talking renewable energy and obviously for us talking specifically offshore wind. So it's great you're here. Thank you for joining us online. We've got an hour and a half in terms of a chance to learn, talk, share information about offshore wind. Delighted we've got such a fantastic panel who I'll introduce in a moment. In terms of the way we're going to do this, we've got a number of polls. You've had an intro video that shows you how the setup you on works, so please do be asking questions. And this technical team of course can help you if anything you need to ask. But ask us questions as we go. Anything that we're saying, feel free to put your questions to us. I will come to those later and I will answer as many as we can. There were this morning's session, there were a lot of questions and but we'll get through what we can. So without further ado, let me welcome the panel. They're going to say some opening remarks in a few minutes and then we'll get on to questions. But to welcome them all and thank them for their time, we have Jonathan Cole, Managing Director for Iberdrola's Global Offshore Wind Business. Mary Thorogood, Senior Specialist in Strategy and Business Development and Government Relations at MHI Vestas Offshore Wind. Benj Sykes, the Vice President, UK Offshore, Head of UK Market Development, Consenting and External Affairs. Have I got that right, Benj? From Ørsted. Christina Horspool, Environment Division Manager at Exodus Group. And Maurice Bray, the Senior Business Development Manager at National Grid Ventures. So, in terms of opening remarks, the theme of today is offshore wind, keeping our eye on the long-term prize. So, we as the UK can be proud of what we've achieved in offshore wind. We've come a long way. Offshore wind is now out there. It's a market busy in a number of countries and across the globe. But of course, we've all been locked down. We're sat here. We're doing this because we're locked down. We're starting to open up in the UK and other nations. But our industry, of course, we need to think about the longer term. We've continued to deliver. We've got a month, of course, now without any coal generation in GB. But I'd like the panel to just give a few views about what they think of as an industry COVID-19 has forced to do. And do you think it's taken our eye off this long-term goal and the significant growth we've got to deliver for offshore wind? Jonathan, can you start?
Sure. So, I mean, I always try to be very optimistic, and I think I am still optimistic about the future of offshore wind, but maybe with just a note of caution. The reason for the optimism is probably twofold. One is I think it's fair to say that the climate change agenda is now unstoppable, and there's no denying the action that needs to be taken on decarbonisation. And there's probably a recognition that as bad as the impact is of this COVID-19 pandemic, most people would probably expect that the impact of a climate crisis would be even more severe and even more sustained. So, I think rather than detract or distract from the need for offshore wind, this has actually strengthened the case. And then the other big thing that's worth thinking about is that long after this public health crisis abates, we will be living with a pretty severe economic crisis. And one of the ways to get out of that economic crisis is to stimulate investments in large-scale infrastructure programs. And offshore wind, can do that, and it can have these cascading benefits all the way through the economy. So if you put those two things together, actually, rather than take away the need for offshore wind, COVID-19, I think, strengthens the case considerably, and it can help with both of those crises still to come. But there is a note of caution, because I think we have to recognise that as an industry, we already have some fragility in our supply chain. We're going to be living in quite a volatile world for a while, with currency devaluations, with access to finance for some parts of the value chain being a bit more difficult. We might see power prices flattening off. We might see restrictions on the way we work that impact on productivity, etc. So there needs to be a recognition in any stimulus package that we have to protect the supply chain to keep it capable of delivering. And probably there also has to be a recognition that there are some things that might force us to not follow exactly the cost reduction trend we were following for a few years, and also not be quite as capable of getting to merchant pricing on offshore wind for a few years. And I think there has to be a recognition of those two factors if we're to keep everything on track. But overall, I think we shouldn't be pessimistic. I think offshore wind is still going to be a major contributor for growth.
Great, Jonathan, thank you for that. Moving quickly on, Mary, what are your opening thoughts?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think I broadly share Jonathan's optimism. I was reflecting before I joined the call on actually the last time I saw many colleagues face to face, and that was celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the sector deal in the Houses of Parliament with a packed, funnily enough now, a packed room of people. But also I'd come directly from meeting with the Governor of Maine to talk about the opportunity for offshore wind in that state as well. And the industry was having a real moment internationally and in the UK. And I don't think in the long term that context has changed. I think, as Jonathan says, there's a number of short-term, long-term and medium-term things we can do to keep us on that path, and actually use this once in a lifetime, once in 100 years type of event to actually make sure offshore wind's at the heart of the recovery across all markets, not just in the UK as well. I mean, I think in the short term, we just need to keep doing what we're doing. We're still delivering projects on time. We've kept most of our UK facilities open, albeit with maybe minor adjustments and short-term closures. And we're still making announcements about UK jobs. I think most people would have seen the announcement about Dogger situating on the Port of Tyne for their operational base today. And that shows we're ready to be a critical part of the UK's response and any stimulus package that comes through as well. I think in the medium term, We need to talk more about how industry and government can make strategic investments to support the UK. What do we need from government and industry to get us on a level playing field with the markets in Europe and further afield that we're going to be competing with? And as Jonathan says, there's a conversation to be had about in this environment, whether it is a straight race to the bottom on costs or whether in the coming years there needs to be a conversation with industry and government about how we balance those priorities between the industrial development and cost to consumer as well. I think in the longer term, there's such a huge conversation about offshore wind in the wider stimulus. I don't really like calling it a green stimulus anymore. It sets us too far apart. I mean, what about electrification, green hydrogen, carbon pricing? There's so many things that offshore wind can be at the heart of in those conversations. I think fundamentally it's all going to be about good jobs in the years to come, and I think all the better if they're in industries like offshore wind, and actually we're well placed to be right at the heart of those conversations.
Great, Mary, thank you very much for that. Okay, Benj, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Maff, and thanks, Jonathan and Mary, for your comments, and good afternoon, or indeed good morning or good evening, depending on where you've joined us from. I guess one of the benefits of doing All Energy this way is we can have a more global audience than perhaps we normally have. I would just really want to echo some of the points that Mary and Jonathan have made about, whilst COVID is clearly a huge human and social tragedy, and we're not through it by any means yet, in the medium term this does create a dynamic which offshore wind can play into. And I think whether it is around other parts of the economy needing to find new places for their goods and services, if you look at aerospace, if you look at automotive, if you look at oil and gas, those supply chains will be looking for new opportunities. I think the world is going to be very different when we're through this pandemic from what it looked like before. So as an offshore wind industry, I think we have great opportunities to bring in new technology, new capability. And I think on the back of that, the UK's drive to get to 40 gigawatts by 2030 and at least 75, I've heard one member of the CCC talk about up to 100 gigawatts by 2050. Those are challenging targets for us to reach. And I think the emergence of this industry through and beyond the pandemic, and particularly the emergence of new supply chains and new opportunities, will be a positive move for the industry. Since we've got a global audience, I'm just going to see if I can share a couple of slides, because I wanted to put a slightly more global picture up of what is going on now. See if my technology can cope with this. So as well as working at Ørsted, I won't repeat the long job title that Maff kindly regurgitated. I just wanted to talk briefly about some work that we're doing together with many of you, companies and organisations around the world, to look at the global opportunity, because just like the pandemic is impacting every part of the world, offshore wind has the potential to do the same in a positive way. And some of you may have heard, but probably most of you won't have heard of this high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. I'm not going to go into detail. The slides will be available later, but this is a coalition of 14 heads of state led by Norway, but it's very global. It's got the Australian Prime Minister, it's got the Japanese Prime Minister, it's got the Canadian Prime Minister, and many others as well, looking at how to deliver sustainable oceans. And I and Stephen Bull from Equinor have been building an industry coalition looking at how can we drive offshore wind globally and hit the ambitious targets, not just for UK or Europe, but globally, that offshore wind needs to set if we're going to see net zero. Something like 5 out of the 12 gigatons of CO2 equivalent that we need to cut it every year from ocean-based emissions will come from offshore wind. That is a huge, huge impact on tackling climate change. And as Jonathan said, we are going to have to pick ourselves up off the floor and deliver that net zero. We have a long-term threat alongside the very short-term one that we're fighting through at the moment. This just gives you a sense of who's involved in it. It's a very broad range of organisations from around the world. both those in offshore wind, but also those such as the World Bank and others who are active in driving the low carbon agenda. And I just wanted to pick up 4 kind of points on this about keeping our eye on the long-term prize. I think, as Jonathan said, the pandemic is creating huge challenges, but it's also demonstrated our imperative need to prepare well for the kind of existential threats that both COVID-19 and climate change present to society. So I think it's a sort of, in a way, useful reminder that we have to take action and we've got to prepare ourselves for these serious threats to society's future. Secondly, and again, we've talked about it, offshore wind has the potential to be really powerful as driving an economic recovery. That, we talk about the green shoots of economic recovery. I think offshore wind will be at the centre of that, both in the UK and for global states around the world. But of course, as the world leader in offshore wind, I think the UK is uniquely placed to take advantage of that. So what we're doing is looking to accelerate the uptake of offshore wind globally. And Mary, you mentioned this point about collaboration and working together with government as we come out of this pandemic. And I think whether it's driving better outcomes for the supply chain, whether it's finding the right balance between economic opportunity and low-cost electricity, whether it's how we drive policies around grid and so on, I think there is a new impetus about collaborating across governments, across industries, across other bodies. We've already seen that in the pandemic, a willingness to put politics aside and work together to solve huge problems that the world faces. I think when we come out of this one, we will be able to turn those collaborative intents towards offshore wind and low carbon. So I actually feel quite hopeful, but we're not there yet. We've got a lot of work to do in the meantime.
Great, Benj. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so next, Christina. So let's, it'd be good to go to you. I'm just going to help. We're doing a team effort here. I'm going to share Christine's slides for everyone. So Christine, off we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and hi everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and with such good company. And I'm actually going to echo a lot of the thoughts and ideas and items that have been raised by the others already. COVID-19, it's hitting us all hard in very different ways. It's consuming a lot of attention. It's affecting how we work. I'm sat here talking to you from my living room, which is quite odd, but also great at the same time. It's impacting how we travel and how we communicate. But importantly and positively, what we are seeing is it's engaging governments and it's affecting and engaging companies, financial communities and civil societies to work together as a team. We are seeing and witnessing global communities and governments, and actually being a part of that, coming together to work towards a common goal. And at the moment, that common goal is to stop the virus in its tracks. But as we've already mentioned, we all have a much longer term and bigger goal to achieve, and that's meeting the net zero targets. So I guess key from me is to start thinking about, in the midst of this global pandemic, governments are going to have numerous decisions to make, which may well be have competing objectives. And how do we bring those objectives together so that we actually stimulate economic recovery, keep people and communities safe, but progress rapidly to a low carbon economy? So as an industry, and when I say industry, I'm actually talking about an energy industry rather than solely the offshore wind industry, I think it's imperative that we keep the focus and the momentum on providing that responsible energy future. So we all know, and everybody listening around the world to this knew, that before COVID-19 it was clear that our industry would play a real critical part for delivering the UK plans to clean energy and power, and therefore achieving our net zero targets. Now, even more so, we've got an opportunity to really accelerate and progress this agenda. So in this moment in time, I think we all have a responsibility to ask ourselves, what part are we going to play, and how do we seize upon this very crazy, strange moment of disruption how can we accelerate progress on the just transition with this post-pandemic green recovery, and therefore secure the domestic supply, keep and in fact create more jobs whilst we decarbonise the economy, and maybe actually we can get something great out of something that is pretty awful. And there are two items that I really want to raise in this discussion for the offshore wind industry, and that's around pace and action. So similarly to COVID-19, it's forced us to evaluate and adapt and prove our agility credentials. And maybe it's time for us as an industry to take stock and have a look at how we're setting ourselves up. We've had a massive success in the UK offshore wind industry to date. But would we design it in the same way if we were to look at where we are now and where we need to be and what we need to achieve? So I'm going to bring a slightly different perspective to the team and a slightly out with kind of ideas, but I'm hoping that will help us to stimulate some discussion on where pace and action maybe needs to be placed to get us all moving along the same agenda, which is ultimately to meet these new targets for offshore wind and actually the net zero goals.
Great, Christina, thank you very much. That's excellent. And then finally, last but not least, Morris, over to you on your opening thoughts, please.
Thank you, Maff, and good afternoon. Hello to everyone who's dialed in. It's always difficult going last in such a group, trying to represent something different. But I think from National Grid's perspective, we've seen an amazing response from staff and people that we're working with and communities to respond to the COVID crisis, both in our territories in the UK and in the United States. We've got a slightly different. I've got a slightly different perspective to a number of the people in the table, in that we're not in the offshore wind industry in the UK, but we are in the renewables business in the US, and we've seen some real challenges in our US onshore renewables business, how to manage business operations across a number of different states. But again, amazing response from employees, from other businesses, and no let up really in efforts to make sure that decarbonisation is front of the conversation. And if anything, these ways of working and these sort of webinars are accelerating engagement and cooperation. And actually, that's one of the potential benefits of the situation that we are in, where such multilateral cooperation is actually being able to be accelerated and expanded. I've got a couple of slides as well, which I'd just quite like to just share, following the lead of Benj, and here I just want to explain a little bit about the business area that I'm in, which is mainly around interconnectors between the UK and the rest of Europe. And through this period, we are still delivering projects under construction to France and to Denmark and to Norway. And those projects have been obviously affected by the COVID outbreak, but through the help of employees and the amazing contribution from our contractors, we're still able to make those projects move forward and still have targets to meet. So I think there have been challenges definitely to make sure that our NSL project and our IFA2 project remain on track, but they are still proceeding incredibly well. And I suppose the key thing that we are thinking about the future is it just there's no reduction in the effort to try and make the climate agenda more central and increasingly relevant. And so we're certainly not seeing any let up in interest to try and harness and harvest the energy resources from the North Sea, and how to make sure that the infrastructure that we are able to put in place is suitable and relevant for 2050. If anything, it's put more focus on the challenge to make sure that climate targets are more in the forefront. And we're certainly, as a business, seeing how we can contribute to make sure that offshore wind is successful in the UK and in Europe. We do recognise that we do need to find better ways of doing that, and that's why I'm here today, to try and be part of that conversation, to try and make sure that the infrastructure that the UK needs is thought about at this time when we're in this sort of emergency, but that we can actually remain focused on the climate agenda that is also relevant for us for the future.
Great, Morris, thank you for that. Right, that's our opening remarks. We're going to, while we answer the first question, I'm going to ask people, direct you to the first poll, which you should be able to see on your screens. How confident are you the UK will get to 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030? From very confident to very sceptical. So do you think we'll get to 40 gigawatts and maybe even go past it, or do you think we're not ready to scale up and or even get close to 30 gigawatt goal? What's your view? So Mary, you mentioned just before lockdown there was a sector deal had its first birthday, as it were. Many people were at a Parliament event listening to the Minister and industry talk about that. And of course we had an election before Christmas, and the UK government has now committed to 40 gigawatts by 2030. So can I ask the panel, and Benj, as the chair of the sector deal, it's right to come to you first, of course. So what do we have to do differently to scale up to hit that 40 gigawatts?
So I guess it is a multi-dimensional challenge. How do we ramp up to 40? And before diving into what gets us to 40, I think there's a really important framing point, which is, as Morris said earlier, we are on the pathway to 75, 80, 90, maybe even 100 gigawatts. And what we mustn't do is, in our drive to get to that short term, and 2030 is a short term target, what we mustn't do is find quick fixes to get there, which make it harder to go the full journey. This is the first lap of a long race. We've got to make sure that we put in the structures and the processes that unlock not just 40, but also 80 and potentially more. I think there's 4 areas I'd probably flag as the challenges. And by the way, I do think we could get there. So I'm hoping the poll will come out with everyone saying very confident that we can get to 40. It's not without its challenges though. And I think the first one is volume. We know there are enough projects around, both from round 3. We've got more volume coming through in round 4 and in ScotWind, which with a, pardon the pun, but with a following wind could potentially get in under the wire for 2030. But if we want to have healthy competition, we need more volume in the system. And I think the Crown Estate and Crown Estate Scotland are well aware of the fact that we've got to push ahead on that. And I know it comes up later, so I won't dive into that in any detail, but having the volume is key. Grid is an urgent issue, and I know Jonathan will have some comments on that. It's a challenge for anyone who's operating in the east of England with onshore cable routes, but also offshore. And from an environmental perspective, we know the North Sea in particular is a very busy place. Finding ways in which you can connect every single individual wind farm to its own connection point in the grid is not a sustainable solution. But by the way, it's worth mentioning that it's a nice problem to have. When the OFTO regime that we operate under was first envisaged, no one thought we would ever be talking about tens of gigawatts of offshore wind. So it made perfect sense when it was a bit of a niche technology 15 years ago. Clearly things have moved on, and the connection regime needs to move with it. I think the third area is around consenting. There's some big challenges around consenting. My company Ørsted and others are waiting for consent decisions in the next few weeks. We're confident obviously about Hornsey 3, but there's a wider challenge. I think the seas are full of human and environmental activity that needs to be carefully managed, and I think we need to see a more strategic approach to how we deal with those issues, both to 2030 but crucially to get beyond. And I think that's one area where we mustn't solve the pathway to 2030 at the cost of the pathway to 2050. And then the final thing is just to reiterate what's been said before, the importance of collaboration. I think as we ramp up, that's only going to work if we see a concerted effort across government, and I mean government working in concert. One thing I've learned over the years is there's no such thing as government, just government departments. We need those departments, BEIS, DEFRA, MHCLG, other departments. We need them all to work together in a concerted way so that we can get to net zero with offshore wind providing the backbone of the power system.
Benj, thank you. And Mary, from an OEM perspective, can you ramp up? I mean, you know, this is more turbines to sell. Can you get there?
Always good opportunity to have more turbines to sell. I think I share, obviously on the OEM side rather than our developer customers, I share the confidence about the 40 gigawatts. I think the important question actually, and we talked a lot at the start about how offshore wind can drive economic growth. And the question is actually how you want to achieve that and from where. I think achieving that with low cost suppliers globally, I think that's achievable, but of course I don't think that's going to cut much ice with this current government importing plenty of components and plenty of expertise from overseas. So the question is actually how do we achieve it with the highest UK content that we can in the supply chain. I think the set still set very extremely high ambitions, and it's good to be ambitious. We made a good start. There's a 250 million fund for innovation and competitiveness. The Offshore Wind Growth Partnership is up and running, issuing pilot calls, and the development of the clusters around the UK is moving at a really, really fast pace. But we're in a world where the global competition is increasing fast, with other markets getting on board. The big players are really coming into the market in the development community and in the supply chain as well. And in the UK, we've spent years thinking about whether we're going to invest in offshore wind, thinking about whether that's the right course. We've tried nuclear, tried other technologies, actually, whilst other particularly European markets have been moving at pace, developing their port infrastructure and also developing their onshore industries to move into offshore. So it's extremely challenging for the UK supply chain to operate on a level playing field. And I think whilst we've made a good start with the sector deal, I think probably what needs to come with that in the next few years is really for government to look at the industry strategically and invest in the right infrastructure, particularly ports, to really support UK businesses to compete so we do achieve that 40 gigawatts with the highest UK content that we can.
Great, thank you, Mary. So let's look at the poll results. So the good news is just over half of people are confident that we're going to get close to 40 gigawatts, and about a third of people are skeptical. I think we're on track to hit the 30, but no more. So that's okay. There's much more, only 1% are very skeptical that we're not even going to get the 30. So that's good. Our industry, we've internalized that we're going to have to treble the amount of offshore wind in the next decade. That's a pretty good start. We'll see where we go to next. Okay. Any other comments from the rest of the panel before we move on? No.
Matt,
Okay.
I think.
Yes.
Sorry.
Christina.
Matt, I think I'd just say that challenge is good, isn't it? And the speakers have just have indicated it is all possible, and I think listening to them both, actually the takeaway message is we need to be driving towards this target together as an industry. So how do we bring the stakeholders, the regulators, the operators, industry all together to see this as a common target and not forget about the target moving forward to 2050 as well, so that we can actually achieve this as where we need to be and how we get there. It's about realizing that ambition as one team almost, which I know I'm a bit of an idealist, and I guess I'm a consultant, so I'm used to bringing lots of teams together, but it just seems like if we could get everybody working towards a common purpose, everybody's all going to have all these different objective minds, this single target.
Christina, we're starting to lose you, so I'm going to ask you to just pause there while your signal comes back. Morris, do you want to come in?
Actually, Muff's probably, I recognise we've got to move on to the next poll, so I'll come in at the next poll with some further thoughts. That's probably best.
All right, thanks, Melissa. Christine, we'll come back to you in a moment. So we're going to put up a second poll. You should see that come onto your screen. What is the biggest barrier to scaling up delivery for offshore wind if we're going to get to 40 gigawatts? Is it finance, permitting, supply chain, grid connection, skills, resources? That's there on your screen now. Start answering. But in the meantime, we're going to look at leasing here as a panel. So we're in the midst of leasing rounds by the Crown Estate and Crown Estate Scotland. The Crown Estate Scotland did this slightly odd teasing press release a couple of weeks ago where they said their paperwork was complete. But we're expecting those rounds to proceed very quickly, very soon. We're expecting new entrants, of course. We're expecting to go out in deeper waters, particularly in Scotland, where it's looking at floating. So the Crown Estate in particular has made clear that it wants to run this process, again. It's not a one-off, as it were. But if we're to deliver 40 gigawatts and then say 75, or as Benj said at the beginning, even further than 75 to 2050, then realistically, how soon after this next set of auctions do we need to go again? And Christina, can you start with that one, please? I think Christina, you've frozen again. Christina, Jonathan, can you come in there and we'll come back to Christina.
Yep, you want me to carry on? Well, yes, please. Give Christina a chance to come back. Yeah, so I think if you look at where we are right now, I think we've got more or less about 33, 34 gigawatts of projects currently existing in the UK. And these processes that we're going to see run this year across the UK are maybe going to take that up to somewhere around 50 gigawatts. So if you're looking at this purely from the point of view of the 2030 target, 50 gigawatts to get you 40 by 2030 seems like, that could work. But I think what you need to remember is that the ambition isn't just to fall over the finish line in 2030, it's to get to 75 gigawatts by 2050. And if you want to do that, you probably need to build 90 because of the repowerings and all the other things that are going to happen. So I think that really, because of the fact that you've got something like a 10-year development cycle from starting on a project to actually producing power from it, you really need straight after this first process has been completed to start working on the next one. And we need to be feeding somewhere in the order of 5 gigawatts or more every second year into the system in order to keep a viable, competitive, vibrant industry, which is going to allow us to get all the way to the 75 gigawatt target. So it's great what the Crown Estate are doing, and hopefully they've got plans to do more of it much more frequently.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Christina. Okay, we're having Christina,
I'm going to go with you soon. Otherwise, if you can still hear me,
We can. No, Christina, you're coming in and out. Okay, so we're going to deal with that with the All Energy Tech crew are going to help us look at that. But can I open it up in terms of other members of the panel? Anyone got any further thoughts on leasing, next steps, what you'd like to see from Crown Estate Scotland or the Crown Estate?
I guess it's kind of inevitable that as another developer, I would only agree with Jonathan that, get more volume out there, let us compete. It's a long and increasingly arduous journey to get from signing an agreement for lease to having commercial operations on a wind farm offshore, and we need to crack on. And I think it's in consumers' interests as well that there is a healthy feedstock of projects, because that drives competition. Competition drives good outcomes for society and consumers. So I don't underestimate the challenges, and if we look at the challenges of the extensions round and the round 4 processes that the Crown Estate's running for England and Wales, you can see it is not a straightforward process, particularly, and I know we're going to come on to this, things like the habitats regulations and the HRA process. There's a lot of environmental as well as grid connection challenges to to this build out. So we absolutely need to get the volume out, but we need to get the enablers for unlocking that volume sorted at the same time.
Yeah,
Great.
I think from a supply chain, particularly an OEM perspective, the more visibility, the better. I don't think anyone in the supply chain makes an investment based on off the back of one auction. But I would sound a note of caution. I completely agree on getting the volume out there, but that's also going to need a supply chain to back that up. I'm confident we can produce the turbines, but there's also vessels. There's a global shortage of vessels to deliver the projects, other components within right across the value chain, and also the people to deliver it. Our people are being stretched now right around the world. So we need experts to deliver it too. So there's also a upskilling that needs to happen as well.
Okay. Oh, great.
I'll just add, Math, I think probably as well, just adding to what Jonathan said about not only the volume, but perhaps the nature of the competition as well needs to evolve and be relevant and appropriate for 2030 and beyond. I guess even the county state wouldn't have been expected to be in the situation we're in now, right in the middle of a process ongoing, but there are probably going to be lessons to learn about the nature of the competition that can be more effective to deliver the wind scale that's needed for those sort of timescales, perhaps.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Now, let's see, we've got the results in. So the biggest issue for people is grid. Maurice, we're going to come and talk a bit more about grid in a few minutes. Supply chain, people are relatively relaxed. Only 15% see supply chain as a potential barrier. But permitting, the panel mentioned that already, obviously some of the permitting issues. So yes, we've got lots of projects consented, but we need much more. So will permitting prevent us? Any responses on the survey on that about what people see as barriers? Does that align with what you're seeing, or is there any surprises there for anyone?
I think that would correspond almost exactly with how I would prioritise it, to be honest. I think on grid, and I guess Maurice will talk a bit more and I'll comment a bit more later in the process. Probably the position with grid is we could just about stagger to 40 gigawatts by 2030, but then we will collapse on the floor at that point and we will go no further. So grid to me is a barrier that has to be addressed immediately, but for the longer term. But it's certainly probably the single biggest thing we have to address as an industry to fulfill our potential. If we're talking about this purely in the context of a 2030 target, I think permitting stands to be the biggest bottleneck. I think the permitting authorities have done a very good job so far in getting us where we've got to, but with the rate of deployment going up and with the complexity now of the projects and some cumulative impact issues, etc., coming in, I think that there's going to be a huge drain on resources for the permitting authorities, the consultees, etc. And so that needs to be addressed pretty quickly, as well as the methodology we use for things like cumulative impact assessment and the amount of time and information we expect from the upfront studies somehow needs to be rationalised in order to take a couple of years out of that development process if we're going to hit the target.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that, Jonathan. Right, well, let's move on. Let's look at supply chain then. So 22nd of May, those of you who are responding is the deadline for the UK government's consultation on auctions. Many of you might have seen I blogged about it at the time it came out. One of the things I noticed, as many others did, of course, is that some rather pointed words on there about supply chain plans. Pointed in government language. It was very discreet, but it was clearly there. Government's not happy with supply chain plans, and it's clearly looking at alternatives. So, but equally, of course, we know we have a sector deal that's committed to 60 gigawatts. So what's the disconnect? Why is government saying it wants more? Why is industry offering more? So how do we deal with that potential disconnect, and how do we make sure we do engage the supply chain and keep driving UK content? Mary, when you're active in looking at supply chain, talking to UK suppliers, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think it's clear to everybody in the industry, and as you say, particularly government, in the politest possible language, that these supply chain plans, they need a review. The world's obviously moved on in many different ways since sort of 2013 and 14. I mean, the huge drop in CFD prices and pressure on costs, and new players coming into the market, as we touched on, developers, supply chain, and new countries taking an interest in what they can bring to the UK as their export play. We've got supply chains now well on their way to being global, but at the same time, we've seen pretty minimal investment until really quite recently in UK infrastructure, whilst particularly other European places have been moving ahead with their infrastructure and also their support for the industry in the way they choose to do it as well. I think the government and supply chain, I think we understand each other pretty well. I think the dialogue's good, and I think obviously it shows in the sector deal process we got to a point where we agreed, or at least agreed to disagree. I think there's probably more government can do to talk to the whole supply chain, and perhaps that's done via the clusters. I think, and they talk very well to the tier ones, but perhaps there's much more they could do to really understand the challenges that the businesses lower down the tiers are facing as well. I think industry can deliver from the UK, and we want to be here. It's obviously optimal for us to be closest to our largest market. But I think, as I touched on before, it's often challenging to be competitive from the UK in this world where we're consistently asked for the lowest possible price, and there's no favours for UK supply chain in the CFD process. We have to work. The UK businesses have to work just as hard as others. I think there's a few things government can help. I wouldn't call it a disconnect, but I think there's a few things government could do to perhaps bring us a bit closer, and to help those either in the UK today or who are looking at the UK to invest, to deliver. I think government needs to be ambitious and clear on their ask. What do they want? What do they want to bring to the UK? Is that electronics? Is it foundations? Is it another blade facility? Help us really understand what it is government wants to do, and what the reward is for doing that as well. I think now, particularly post-COVID, is there flexibility on this? Everything must be absolute lowest cost, preferably merchant. I think, is there a trade-off, and what is it between the cost of energy and job creation? And I think also give us the context for long-term investment. We don't, as I say, we don't make investments one by one. We look at the next few rounds that are coming forward, and we need somewhere to put it. What's the infrastructure that we're going to be putting our investment in as well? So I don't think there's a disconnect, but I think there's a number of other things outside the sector deal which government can help us do to deliver and really bring us much closer together.
Okay, thanks, Mary. And Benj, from the point of view of the sector deal work, what's the conversation with government, and what do we do next as an industry?
So just to pick up on some of Mary's points, I mean, I think the world is a very different place, even before COVID, actually, from when we started the conversations with government around the sector deal. But if you wind right back to where this whole narrative around UK content started, that's been around for at least a decade. And, you know, completely understandably, this has been a big driver for government when they're putting policies in place 10 years ago to support the development of, at the time, an expensive way of generating clean electricity. I think the world has moved on a lot, and I think we need to reflect where we are today. And I know I've been working with Jonathan and others in the Industry Council to look at what is really going to drive the government's agenda, because the government uses UK content as shorthand for economic benefits to the UK economy from building offshore wind. And I'm very keen, and we have started discussions on alongside UK content. We also crucially need to look at exports. We need to look at GVA. What's the GVA impact of this industry on the UK economy? That's what other industries like automotive and aerospace would be measuring. And how many jobs are we creating? Because in the end, if we're creating jobs, we're driving exports and we're delivering economic growth through the GVA measurement, I think we are delivering what needs to be done. And this is a global market, as I talked about in my opening comments. You know, we're talking about huge volumes, well over 1,000 gigawatts globally. the prize in this industry is to be good at exporting, to have goods and services that the world wants. I come from an oil and gas background. I have seen the success from the subsea oil and gas industry of exporting the capabilities developed in Scotland, Aberdeen and the Northeast, and have taken those globally. And I think what I would like to see is we find ways to do the same. We need to pick our battles and we need to win them on a global stage.
Benj, thank you for that. That's some wise words. Okay, right. So let's look at the poll results that are from the third poll, while we're talking about the impact of COVID-19 on people's work. So of our audience, just under half say that it's only impacted them a small amount. There's the challenges, but on the whole, they're still focused on the original work, which is good to hear. And only 10% say it's affected them either a significant amount or quite a lot, and a quarter neutral. So, so it's interesting how we've adapted. And from a personal view, it's interesting for me as an independent consultant now, who's been in the industry, so now working from my home office. It's nice to be working to everyone else in their home office. So I see some benefits to it. And clearly, I've talked to people who are enjoying the change in scene. So managing the childcare and schooling and all that is interesting, but that's no different for anyone else in the country. It's good to hear we're getting on with it. We talked about COVID already, but before we move on, we're going to talk about grid next. Any panel members got any thoughts or reflections on what we've learned from dealing with COVID-19 they want to share?
I'll just mention a couple of things. I mean, I think one observation from our part is that we all had, I'm sure, business continuity plans that we were very happy with and proud of. But I'm kind of reminded of the words of Mike Tyson when he said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And no one's business continuity plan, I'm sure, properly prepared them for this. But what has been really impressive is how quickly we adapted to the situation that we found ourselves in, how quickly and how well integrated we were with our supply chain in terms of how to deal with this, how everyone was motivated to keep going, recognising that, yes, we had to have our first responsibility for public health and safety of our people and all the rest of it, but we also have a duty to carry on doing what we do, because what we do is an essential service in the economy. And so with that in mind, these highly professional organisations and highly professional people managed to get together and do some quite amazing things to adapt the way of working, to keep going and keep safe. And what you'll see if you look across the portfolios of offshore wind farms, they're more or less performing as they would have had there not been a pandemic. And if you look at some of the construction activity going on, certainly south of the border, it's still working well. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we completed the installation of our East Anglia 1 offshore wind farm. And that's a big milestone at any time in the life of an offshore wind farm, but at this particular time, it's even more impressive. And we did it in an entirely safe way, thanks to the cooperation between us and Siemens Gamesa and DEME and all these other organisations that helped to do it. So to me, it was actually an opportunity to show just how resilient and how competent and professional we are. And I think that kind of experience, as horrible as this pandemic is, it strengthens you, and it shows you that when it really matters, you find you're a lot stronger and a lot more capable than you maybe thought you were.
I agree with that. We also completed an installation during this time off the Belgian coast as well, and that's again tribute to everyone in our business and our customer and the rest of the supply chain as well. It's really quite something to see. And I think also from a factory setting, we've kept our 700 people plus blade factory on the Isle of Wight operational throughout this time. And some of the innovation and collaboration I've seen in colleagues is really quite something. It's really great to see everyone come together, both at the factory and in the service operation. I think one thing I would say actually, as we get used to this new way of working, there'll actually be opportunities for business within that. So how do we better manage inside of CTVs? What are the processes, what's the equipment that we're going to need in the new environment. And I think that's something for really innovative companies to think about where those opportunities will be in this new normal that we're going to be working in as well.
Thanks, Mary. Anyone else before we move on?
Just echo a similar experience to Jonathan and Mary. I think there has been a significant element of luck depending on different project status, but there's been an incredible willingness from contractors and almost a significant sacrifice in terms of their sort of home life. A number of contractors have stayed in the UK when they're normally domiciled outside of the UK, and they've enabled some of our projects to continue. So one of our cross-border links with France was able to complete DC cable testing only a couple of weeks ago, which wouldn't have been possible had a number of the specialists travelled home. They sacrificed their sort of home life balance and stayed in the UK and are continuing to get the job done. So there's an amazing amount of sacrifice from the contractor base to keep projects going.
Okay, thank you, Maurice. Right, so let's move on to the fourth question. We're going to be polling the audience about grid connection models. We're going to be asking people their views for, particularly for round 4. Do you think that we should be focused on generator build, essentially the single project OFTO model that today's default? Should we be looking at multi-project OFTO, multi-purpose connections, interconnectors, or do you have another idea in mind? And so, for the panel though, the question is, grid has just highlighted in this previous poll has been a significant barrier. People are worried about grids. So how much do connection issues worry you in your work, and what are your concerns, but also what would you like to change? And we've talked about how COVID, we talked about the scaling up of offshore wind gives us an opportunity to do things differently. Grid is one of those areas, of course, it's right to be for us to do work differently. The new CEO of Ofgem, Jonathan Brearley, has said he's in one of his priorities is helping look at connection issues for offshore wind and delivering off the 2030 targets. What can Ofgem do as well, if you want to address that? So big issue, critical we get it right. Maurice, what are your thoughts, please?
Yeah, it isn't probably a surprise that 35% of the vote was suggesting grid connection would be a blocker. I just want to share a slide to sort of provoke some different thinking, perhaps. When we look at projects coming from offshore to the UK, we're obviously thinking about offshore wind, but if you take the consideration of other offshore projects such as electricity interconnectors, there's an amazing amount of capacity that's already planned to be connected to the grid. And we've already heard about some of the challenges from Benj about projects increasingly going to face more difficulty getting through HRA and consenting, and increasingly single purpose projects are increasingly challenging to deliver. Now the picture on the left hand side sort of gives a representation of the congestion of existing connection capacity to the grid on the East Coast. If you superimpose the Crown Estate process on top of that, then you're well into 40 gigawatts, and with Scotland you're getting up to 50 gigawatts, as Jonathan said. But when you combine the capacity that exists for other offshore projects such as interconnectors, you're getting up to 70 gigawatts. And so there's an argument, and there's a growing argument certainly within Ofgem and BEIS, and consistent with what Jonathan Brearley said, to think differently about offshore projects, and especially how we can make better use of the purpose of the grid capacity, and whether or not it be combined purpose for both offshore wind connection and interconnectors. And I think hopefully this slide conveys the possibilities of being able to look at grid connection differently, and not to necessarily think that there is an even bigger challenge to solve, when in fact there is capacity there that, if it was repurposed and thought about differently, could be used to better achieve the 2030 and 2050 targets. So one of the things that we're thinking about as a business is how to contribute and provide the interconnector capability that we have and help integrate the offshore wind industry in the UK, thinking about our cross-border HVDC capabilities, the partners we have in Europe, and how we can use that potentially to add an additional stepping stone into the integration of the large-scale offshore wind that we're thinking about into the 2050s, moving much more from individual projects, which sort of have the potential for congestion and sort of creating a backlog with the cumulative impacts of individual projects, and thinking about how those can be combined and coordinated on a greater extent, potentially looking at the more of the German model for offshore transmission coordination, initially creating more clusters for offshore wind connections offshore, but then recognizing that there is an ongoing need for cross-border interconnection at the same time, and therefore it's recognizing that there are other offshore projects that could be combined in a different way to potentially get to a much more coordinated and much more multi-purpose infrastructure that would be more relevant for achieving 2030 targets, not least, but also 2050.
Great, Morris, thank you for that. Jonathan, grid's something you've talked about, it's something you care about and worry about, as it were. What are your thoughts on that, and what would you like to see done differently?
Well, I think there's two aspects to the grid discussion. One is about the regulatory regime you choose, which is entirely a problem or solution of our own making, and the other is the more technical aspects about how you integrate this volume of renewable energy into the grid. On the first point, I mean, I think the OFTO regime fulfilled a purpose which was relevant 10, 11 years ago when it was conceived, which was, to try and stimulate a competitive process, drive down the cost of capital for these types of investments, and to take care to avoid stranding of assets. But the world has moved on so much since then that now that OFTO regime has fulfilled its purpose, and it's time to move on, in my opinion. If we're talking about an industry which is going to supply 3/4 of the energy in this country, offshore wind, that needs to be done as part of a strategically planned network. That can't be done on a project-by-project, point-by-point basis. It makes no sense from a technical perspective, from an economic perspective, or an environmental perspective to do it that way. So if I would certainly advocate moving to a model where we create these strategically planned networks with much better interconnection between the assets, improving the resiliency and efficiency of those assets, also having much better long-term planning, which is going to remove the bottlenecks from the deployment programs and also probably help drive economies of scale, and also is going to allow much fewer landfalls, much fewer onshore connection points, and therefore take a lot of the pressure out of the onshore discussion about where all this onshore infrastructure is going to go. And so for me, it would be crazy to try and carry on much further than 2030 with the current process we've got, and we need to do something to address that. But we need to do it now, because to be ready by 2030, we need to start talking now and acting now. The second point is the more technical one, which is that there is probably the biggest technical challenge we now face as an industry is about integration on the grid. I think that probably it can be addressed in three ways. One is storage, the other is demand side response, and the other is interconnection. The good news is that we already have the capability, the technology to probably address all of those. All we need to do is create the right market mechanisms to bring that technology to market and find ways to make it commercial and make it viable. And then we can address those problems too. So, but those are the two single biggest things I think that are going to stop us in the UK from achieving the full potential is the way in which we deliver the grid and how we manage this variable power on the grid.
John, thanks for that. So let's look at what the audience says. So over 2/3 almost say they want to see multi-purpose connection with interconnectors. So they're agreeing with you. And a third want to see multi-project off-toes. Only 6% are happy with the current arrangements. I guess that's not a surprise either, but equally important, I guess, only 1% saying other. So there's not another idea. It's not, we don't have to do something new. We just have to think bigger, think more strategic, as you say. Christina, can I bring you in on that? I mean, what's your take on grids and how do we plan more strategically, particularly to take in some of these other issues that Jonathan's raised about environment, consenting challenges, etc.?
I am absolutely on board with everything that Jonathan just said. I think the sooner that we actually look at the UKCS as an energy basin and we start planning holistically and actually look at the marine spatial planning strategically, and we start bringing in all of the existing infrastructure, looking at what other projects are going on. I mean, we haven't even mentioned what the part hydrogen might have to play in all of this in terms of supply, demand, distribution, transmission. I think grid and the landfall piece is obviously a big piece when it comes to consenting, and if we can get on top of that so that we're not trying to place numerous hubs at numerous small landings, and actually we're looking at it as a hub basis, and we're actually looking at this as a collaborative industry to get after the same goal, then we do have a chance of meeting these targets. But like Jonathan and the others have said, that we can't simply look at just getting the capacity in the water. We need to look at everything else around and how all the interactions to do that and what it means when we do.
Great, thank you, Christina. We've got a question come in that links that. So with high targets and so many challenges and so many other users, fishing industry, energy producers, birds, etc., does one take priority over the other, and how do we manage that? Any further thoughts on that? I mean, it's not about prioritization, but it is about being realistic about how we plan for all these different activities in the ocean.
Yeah, definitely. There's numerous perspectives and numerous objectives and things that all of these different parties are trying to achieve and get after, all at odds with each other's generally. And actually it's about how do we bring all of those perspectives together so that we can work on achieving a common goal for the basin. Okay,
thanks, Christina. And there's a question come in, nice question here. I'm an energy economics master's student, set to graduate in September. What's your advice for someone like myself who wants to begin his career in this sector whilst the job market is so strained? For me, it's growing. If you've got economics under your belt, that's a good skill to have. So you're looking in the right place, I'd suggest. But others from the panel and bench, first few skills is a big part of the sector deal, of course. So how are we as an industry trying to support people, and what would you recommend to someone starting out today?
That's a tricky question just at the moment. I think I guess I would encourage anyone who wants to get into this sector is just to start engaging through things like this, but also go look at our jobs pages. We are all growing fast. 40 gigawatts by 2030, a lease round coming up in the England and Wales, then shortly after one in Scotland. There's a lot of businesses looking to set up shop and grow in the UK, so there's plenty of opportunity coming up. I know it's a slightly strange environment in which to go job hunting, but it is happening, and so yeah, best of luck for whoever asked that question, but I'm quite sure you will find your way into this exciting sector if you're determined to do so.
Great. Anyone else like to comment?
Just to say good luck, and MHI Vestas are currently recruiting for our graduate scheme, so check out our...
Go we.
There you go. You'll be you're in demand.
I'll just add, Matt,
we're fighting over people.
Just to encourage the student who's looking at energy economics, I think one of the big challenges is translating the economic rationale into messages that stakeholders and the communities at large can understand and accept. So I think the career path on energy economics is very relevant, but it's increasingly relevant to try and translate the economic story into for public consumption, so that everyone can buy into the need for offshore infrastructure and understand the necessity for it and the consequences of it being integrated onshore, which inevitably lead to some impacts on local communities. So telling that story in the socio-economic welfare from that perspective, I think is very important. So yeah, definitely keep interested and keep going. Great, thanks. Okay, slightly tangent, different view about investment in the economy. With COVID-19 and finances being constrained, will that impact us? How dependent are we on UK government for infrastructure funding? It's cropped up in a couple of points earlier on. Mary, you highlighted the difference here to the other countries in terms of how they fund infrastructure, but other panelists have talked about the need for infrastructure and the need for government to recognise our role as an industry that can help to revitalise the economy. But so do you think that's going to be a problem, or do you think we'll be? Do you think we're going to be fine because of our importance? Mary, do you want to take that first?
I think just speaking purely in terms of infrastructure investment, because obviously the CFD, actually in the last round, it looked like we'll be paying back, projects will be paying back into the public purse from the results that we had. I think we're at a really unique, we were anyway before COVID, but with the current government who are actually really looking to invest in this kind of infrastructure, particularly in the place where probably industry would like it, and that's somewhere on the east coast in the UK. That's political wins, and also living in remember that post-Brexit environment as well. So I think we're in the position where we can really be more willing to listen than we were before, because they've committed to offshore wind through items like the sector deal and CFD rounds, but also they're in a place where they realise they've got to drive job creation primarily up and down the east coast of England.
Thanks, Mary. Anyone else? Any thoughts on government investment and our reliance upon it?
Yeah, let me just say a couple of things if you don't mind, Mark. So I wouldn't categorise our projects as being needing government investment as such. I mean, as Mary said, actually we are now returning money to the pot, but there is a number of enabling investments that I think would certainly help our industry to flourish and would help us to maximise the opportunities in the supply chain. Now, we're sitting here today, we haven't really quantified what the impact is going to be on the UK economy of COVID-19. We don't know how big the hole is going to be that's going to have to be filled. We don't know what measures are going to have to be taken to address that. So we understand there's a challenge ahead. But I mean, just before this crisis, a lot of the messaging coming from government was about diversification of the UK economy, was about spreading the opportunity away from the big cities. And I hope that continues to be a key theme, because that will drive the right type of thinking to help us with the enabling infrastructure. Also, in the last economic crisis that we had more than 10 years ago, in the decisions that were made after that, you can't deny we saw an increase in inequality. We saw a growing lack of diversification in our economy, and that is what caused, I think, the need to start talking about addressing that imbalance. And I really hope whatever decisions we make have that in mind, and we don't again retreat back to the cities and forsake the coastal communities and post-industrial towns. So I understand there's a big challenge for the UK government and every government to come out of this pandemic, but there are decisions that can be made that can actually improve economic diversification and enable the types of private sector investments that can get the economy moving again. And I hope that that's where our attention is focused in future.
Great, Jonathan, thank you. Okay, we've got 50 minutes left, so let's try and have a few short, sharp questions. So firstly, there's a very quick question here, summary from someone. Do we have enough vessels? People have talked about 40 gigawatts. The audience is, and we are confident we'll get close at least. But Mary and others have talked about scaling up around the world. We've got bigger turbines, of course. thoughts on if the vessels are big enough? Benj?
Well, it depends how big Mary and others want to make the turbines, of course. There's no doubt that there's a tight squeeze in the vessel supply chain, and that's, we are again a victim of our success that vessel owners commission vessels that can install the kind of turbines that we want for a few years, but then the turbines get too big and we need bigger ships. And I think, it's a very positive story, but it also puts a lot of pressure on vessels as a critical part of the supply chain. So I guess the short answer is, yeah, it's going to be tight, but I do believe we can deliver up to 40 with what we know is coming and what's already there. But of course, the more the global market grows, the more stimulus there is to fill those gaps in the supply chain. And ultimately, there will always be that balance. And of course, if you talk about a particular point in time, no one can be absolutely sure where the supply-demand balance is in that particular point in time. But overall, what we're talking about is more than a terawatt of offshore wind, and that does mean we are going to need, and so we will see more vessels.
Great. Mary, you're building your turbines bigger and bigger. Can your vessel suppliers keep up?
Because we build them bigger because our customers ask us to.
Benj, it's your fault.
That's why. I think it's going to be tight, as Benj says. I think also particularly the market we also have a big eye on is the US, and of course the US has the Jones Act regulations where vessels must be US flagged. It was particularly good to see news last week that Dominion Energy in Virginia will be looking at a consortia to build a vessel, and I think we would see that as a good move and perhaps taking the pressure off some of what we see in Europe and Asia Pacific. Of course, the thing that we're watching for, if there's any delays post-COVID, either to auction rounds coming through or to projects being delivered for whatever reason it might be, that may put pressure on availability in coming years. But as Ben says, we'll have to be flexible, be innovative, all the things that we've talked about that our industry is really good at.
Great, thanks, Mary. Okay, next question. If I can ask as well the lead organisers and the audience, we're approaching the end, so we've got one final poll for you, and that poll is, what do we do next? What future webinars would you like us to look at? So that will come up. Please do let us know. That will help the READ team and Judith Patton, who many of you of course know, think about where we go next and what areas we should focus on for this next set of webinars. READ are planning to do these monthly, of course, and of course we've still got the All Energy Show where hopefully we'll be at soon. So please do let us know. But next question on one of those potential areas, hydrogen, and there'll be a talk tomorrow, of course. Benj, I'm going to come to you because the question asks about the Hornsey project where you're working on hydrogen, but it also asks about the role of hydrogen in helping manage interconnection, say by provision of hydrogen to the gas grid. So two parts to this. What's the link between offshore wind and hydrogen? And how much might hydrogen help us with manage some of these challenges with interconnection if it's, say, we're doing power to gas using offshore wind?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I do believe hydrogen is going to be the next big thing. I know there are those who would say hydrogen is too difficult a vector to use. I think it offers huge opportunities for decarbonising beyond power. We're already, with the Gigastack project that the question refers to, that's a project to work on a concept for 100 megawatt electrolyser connected through Hornsey 2 that would deliver green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen to Phillips 66 refinery in the Humber. Hydrogen is going to be huge, both in its own right, but also as an enabler for offshore wind. We talked about balancing supply and demand and ensuring grid stability. Hydrogen as a means of storage is exciting. Obviously, the place you would store it is by spiking it into the gas grid. I think we can take, where we have plastic pipe, we can already take up to 10% hydrogen in the gas grid without too much difficulty. And I think that creates a massive opportunity for storing large amounts of offshore wind. So absolutely, hydrogen is still uncertain exactly how we're going to deliver it. It's got to come a long way down the cost curve. The positive thing is a large part of that cost curve journey is about the cost of electricity, and we've already seen what's happened with that. And I think with the right regulatory framework, with the right support mechanisms, we can do what we've done in offshore wind and see that cost come down, so we can compete very effectively with other forms of hydrogen production.
Great, thanks, Benj. And Christina, it's something Exodus are working on, isn't it? So what do you see as some of the issues in terms of scaling up hydrogen and making it part of the offshore wind offer?
We thanks, Math. So I think what we need to be looking at is really scaling up the electrolysis pilot projects, and like Benj already mentioned, there is infrastructure there. Some of it can take up to 10% of hydrogen already, but it's not as simple as just using infrastructure that is in place kind of to transport the hydrogen. So there's lots of nuances and things to consider when we look at that as an option. But it needs some investment and some funding to see it at large scale, similarly to the floating wind in deep waters. We want to see a larger scale deployment and testing and piloting, so that we can keep investor risk low and actually see that we can start bringing those costs down. It's definitely something that the majors are looking at in quite a lot of detail in terms of oil and gas, and I think again it comes back to that argument of let's not be doing anything let's not do this in silos. Let's make sure we're bringing the right teams together to talk about how we best get these innovations and pilot projects off the ground.
Thank you for that. Poles also in hydrogen and floating offshore wind are the two things people want us to talk about more, so we'll do that a bit more. But so let's look at floating now very briefly. It's cropped up briefly in the discussions. The question was about what role will floating play to hit that 40 gigawatts by 2030, but we can take that first, but then let's also widen it out. What's the specific role for floating? What do we need to do next, particularly if we're going to grow the contribution of floating and make sure it's a UK opportunity and economic play for us, as well as a generational play? Let's see, who first? Mary, I mean, you can make turbines for fixed and for floating structures, but so what's MHI Vestas thinking about in this space right now?
Well, we're pretty active. We are I think we just completed installing WindFloat off the Portuguese Atlantic coast, which really exciting projects, and actually undertaken in winter conditions, which again, big challenge for our teams in the sea there. And we're due to install Kincardine in Scotland, 5 turbine V164s later this year as well. So we're really active in the space. I think we need to get moving commercially. We've seen France put a lot of investment and give a pretty clear pathway to realising quite significant projects. I think there's a conversation right now in the current consultation around how government can support floating in AR4, and it's good to see they're heading in that direction. That auction needs to be set in the right way, and to be sure that the right capacity gets through in order to set the scene for delivering more commercially, perhaps off the Scottish coast later in the 2020s, but really moving towards the early 2030s as well.
Thanks. And Christina, something you care about, I know, and you see it as an opportunity for diversification out of oil and gas as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's applying the same ideas and technology for the offshore wind that we've been using for a long time in oil and gas. And I think I find it really exciting because it opens up the deeper waters. It's moving us out further, which then brings into play kind of reducing some of the consenting issues in terms of landscape and visual. So I think floating definitely has a real part to play in our offshore wind piece if we can start commercialising it, like Mary said. And I think it's a great step in the right direction if we separate offshore wind and fixed and floating in terms of the CFD. I think we need to see large scale demonstrations of floating to get it moving, but actually it's an exciting place to be, and I think if we don't move fast and at pace with it, we're gonna fall behind in terms of being the leaders in that area.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and we've seen clearly, for example, Total moving into this space for floating offshore wind, looking at projects in the Celtic Sea. So it's interesting how offshore and floating is moving both in Scotland and the southwest. Work I'm doing with a company called Seawind, looking at floating as a turbine technology. There's lots happening all of a sudden. Jonathan, Iberdrola recently announced trials with Olsen's looking at different floating platforms and technology. So you must be taking it seriously. I mean, has that come quicker than you would have thought a few years ago? Has the technology moved on now to a point where a company like Iberdrola can really get involved and push forwards?
I mean, I think it's come at the right time. It's come at the time we probably expected. I mean, for most of the last decade, we focused on fixed foundation and getting the cost in there, because that was, I think, an existential imperative for our industry. But now that we're in the comfortable position of being able to talk about 2030 and beyond, you have to start talking about floating. Well, the UK isn't going to get anywhere near 75 gigawatts if it doesn't start taking floating more seriously. And there's a lot of other countries that want to exploit their coastline for offshore wind because of the contribution it can make to decarbonisation, but they don't have the shallow water resource to do it in. So for sure, floating's going to be big. How soon it's going to be big depends on a couple of factors. I mean, to me, right now, looking at floating and comparing it to fixed, floating is way more expensive because the structures are much bigger and they're more expensive to do first-of-a-kind structures. But the advantage floating has is it's much more prone to mass production, and its installability can be easier if you've got the right infrastructure in place. But in order to take advantage of that, you need to have scale. And the other thing you need to probably have is a rationalisation of the technology race we're in. There's more than 60 concepts being worked on probably right now. And actually what you need in the next 5 years or so is enough scale of projects coming into the market and a few enough technologies to actually take that scale and use it to start driving the cost down. And if that happens, it's entirely conceivable that floating can make a contribution to the 2030 target. But, you know, that to me is a question of timing. Eventually that will happen, and floating is going to be a big part of our industry.
Good, thanks, Jonathan. And we've got a couple of minutes left. Let's focus on one last area we've already touched on in this discussion on floating, but that's oil and gas diversification. We've obviously got some big players like Equinor already doing a lot within offshore wind, floating and fixed. We've got new players like Total, Eni coming in. But equally, and one of the big industries impacted partly by COVID, but also by big geopolitical oil plays is the oil and gas industry. Our industry has to deal with negative pricing. Well, now the oil and gas industry is having to deal with negative pricing. So quick answers. I'll come to each of you, the final, all five of you. If you were talking to colleagues, people you know in the oil and gas sector, what would you be telling them right now? And Benj, you're an ex-oil and gas man, so I'll come to you first. You know, what would you say to a younger you who's still in that industry?
Yeah, so 20 years, I'd just say come over from the dark side.
Mary?
Apply for the MHI Vestas graduate scheme.
Morris?
Yeah, come and help us develop better offshore platforms.
Jonathan?
It's time for you to start working with us, not against us.
Okay, thank you. And Christina?
What ideas do you have to integrate the separate energy industries at the moment?
Great, that's really helpful. So thank you to you as a panel. That's been really interesting. We've covered a lot of ground in an hour and a half. Thank you to you as an audience. We've had a great set of polls, some interesting results from that. There'll be follow-up, I'm sure, from the Reed team about what we do next. There are more sessions tomorrow, including on hydrogen. You're saying you want to hear more about hydrogen, so if you can, tune back in and listen to those, and come back, of course, to hear more from All Energy. There'll be more of these webinars taking place. It's nice that we can all get together. We've changed how we work, of course. It's good to hear you as an audience. You're still working hard. We're still aiming to focus on the long term, which is the theme of today. But things will start to shift back. Hopefully, as soon as now, we will be able to get together in All Energy and at the other events out there meet face to face. But for now, it's been great to have you all here taking part. I hope you've enjoyed it as a panel. Hope you've enjoyed it as an audience. I've enjoyed sharing it, and I hope to see you all soon. So on that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.